In the early days, Christians were the hunted. The Roman Empire saw them as a threat, leading to brutal executions and public spectacles. Christians were fed to lions, burned alive and tortured. This persecution laid the groundwork for a faith that would soon turn the tables with ferocious zeal. With Emperor Constantine's conversion in the 4th century, Christianity transformed into the state religion, and the once persecuted became the persecutors. Pagan temples were razed, their priests murdered, and followers either forcefully converted or slaughtered. The faith that once cried out for tolerance and compassion now wielded the sword without mercy. Dissent within the Christian community itself was met with ruthless suppression. Heresies were crushed with an iron fist, and dissenters were tortured and executed in the name of preserving truth. The message was clear: conform or die. In 391 AD, the pagan temple called the Serapeum in Alexandria was destroyed by Christians. Pagan scholars were expelled, and their works were either confiscated or destroyed. Those who resisted were brutally beaten and killed. The Donatists, a Christian sect in North Africa, faced severe persecution under Constantine and his successors. Followers of Manichaeism, a syncretic religion, were hunted down and exterminated. Pelagius and his followers, who denied original sin, were declared heretics, their writings burned, and their leaders executed. Across the empire, pagan statues were defaced, temples demolished, and altars desecrated. The temples of Apollo and Artemis, among others, were reduced to rubble. Pagan priests were murdered or forced to convert, their sacred rituals stamped out under the heel of Christian zealotry. The hypocrisy was staggering. A religion that preached turning the other cheek had become the hammer of God, smashing any opposition in its path. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD heralded an era where doctrinal purity was enforced with a brutal iron fist. Convened by Emperor Constantine, this council aimed to address the Arian controversy, which questioned the nature of Christ. The council decreed that Jesus Christ was of the same substance as God the Father, establishing the foundation of Orthodox Christianity. Following the Council of Nicaea, the Roman Empire implemented a series of religious edicts and legal measures designed to enforce Christian orthodoxy and suppress pagan practices. Arian Christians who held beliefs contrary to this orthodoxy were hunted down, their churches burned, and their leaders executed. The Edict of Thessalonica declared Nicene Christianity as the official state religion of the Roman Empire and mandated that all Roman subjects adhere to the faith as defined by the Council of Nicaea. Pagan sacrifices and celebrations were prohibited, temples and statues destroyed, and their priests executed. Books deemed incompatible with Christian texts were burnt. Many church fathers were wary of secular philosophy, and Tertullian, a prominent theologian of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, famously asked, "What indeed has Athens to do with Jerusalem? What concord is there between the Academy and the Church?" In 315 AD, the Christianized Roman Empire implemented a series of anti-Semitic edicts that institutionalized discrimination and persecution against Jewish communities. Jews were prohibited from circumcising their Christian slaves. By 321 AD, Jews were forbidden to own Christian slaves. In 339 AD, Emperor Constantius II banned intermarriage between Jews and Christians, making such unions punishable by death. In 438 AD, Theodosius II restricted Jews from holding public office, serving in the military, and building new synagogues. As Christianity solidified its power, internal purges and external persecutions escalated. The Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 mandated that Jews wear distinctive clothing, making them targets for Christian mobs. Pope Innocent III declared Jews, like the fratricides and murderers of the Lord, shall never escape their servitude, fueling centuries of anti-Semitic violence and discrimination. In the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Justinian I enforced Christian orthodoxy ruthlessly. The Monophysites, who believed in a single divine nature of Christ, faced relentless persecution, with their leaders arrested, exiled and executed, and their churches seized. Pagan temples were systematically destroyed. The academy founded by Plato was shut down, symbolizing the triumph of Christian dogma over pagan philosophy. Throughout Europe, pagan tribes were forcibly converted. St. Martin of Tours led campaigns to destroy pagan sites and convert their followers, often through violence. Christian missionaries, supported by local rulers, enforced conversions through intimidation and force. The forced baptism of Clovis I, the Frankish king, involved threats of violence against those who resisted. The Council of Agda in 506 AD issued decrees against pagan practices, resulting in the execution of pagan priests and the destruction of sacred sites. Jews and Samaritans faced severe restrictions and violent persecution. In 529 AD, Justinian banned the practice of Judaism and Samaritanism, leading to riots and massacres in Palestine. Thousands were killed and synagogues were destroyed. In 597 AD, St. Augustine of Canterbury, sent by Pope Gregory the Great, played a pivotal role in converting Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. The process was violent, with pagan temples destroyed and resistance met with coercion. In 678 AD, Emperor Constantine IV ordered the destruction of the Temple of Aphrodite in Cyprus, replacing it with a Christian church. Church leaders often endorsed and participated in the persecution of non-Christians to maintain the purity of the faith. The Byzantine Empire experienced the iconoclast controversy, an internal conflict over the use of religious images. In 726 AD, Emperor Leo III issued an edict prohibiting the veneration of icons, leading to widespread destruction of religious art. Churches and monasteries resisting this policy were attacked and their icons defaced or destroyed. Monks and clergy who opposed iconoclasm, known as iconophiles, were persecuted, with many imprisoned, tortured and executed. Charlemagne, also known as Charles the Great, expansionist campaigns enforced brutal Christianization, particularly against the Saxons. In 782 AD, the massacre of Verdun saw 4,500 Saxon captives executed for refusing conversion. The 785 AD Capitulary for Saxony imposed the death penalty for non-compliance with Christian customs. Charlemagne's methods included destroying sacred sites and enforcing mass conversions. Pagan resistance was met with ruthless suppression, including mass executions and forced baptisms. Charlemagne's successors continued his harsh policies. The spread of Christianity among the Slavic peoples involved significant violence and coercion, with Saints Cyril and Methodius, sent by the Byzantine Empire, initiating diplomatic missions in 863 AD, later turning to coercion. In the Balkans, Boris I of Bulgaria violently suppressed paganism, executing resisting priests. Otto the Great's campaigns against pagan Slavic tribes involved systematic violence and forced conversions to Christianity. They were subjected to military raids, their religious sites were destroyed, and those who resisted conversion were killed. The Battle of Lechfeld in 955 AD saw Otto I's forces decisively defeat the pagan Magyars. His victory led to enforced Christianity in conquered territories. Leaders like Duke Boleslaus I of Bohemia and King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway used brutal tactics, including executions and temple destructions, to impose Christianity. The Norman conquest of England in 1066 AD brought significant changes, including the imposition of Norman Christian rule. William the Conqueror's regime sought to eradicate any lingering pagan customs. Pagan sites were destroyed, and strict penalties were imposed on those who practiced pre-Christian traditions. The Normans reinforced Christian orthodoxy by establishing new churches and monasteries, often on the ruins of pagan temples. In 1096 AD, during the First Crusade, Jewish communities in the Rhineland were massacred by crusaders en route to the Holy Land, resulting in thousands of deaths and forced conversions. The Synod of Pavia in 1022 AD condemned heretical sects, ordering their leaders to be burned at the stake, setting a grim precedent. In 1076 AD, the Synod of Worms declared the excommunication and deposition of Pope Gregory VII, leading to violent reprisals against the Pope's supporters. Public executions of heretics and opponents reinforced the Church's power through fear. The Albigensian Crusade, launched by Pope Innocent III to eradicate the Cathar heresy in southern France, involved brutal military action and persecution. The 1209 AD massacre at Béziers saw the slaughter of an estimated 20,000 people, including many non-Cathars. The siege of Carcassonne in 1209 AD led to the capture and execution of many Cathar leaders. The execution of over 200 Cathars at Montségur in 1244 AD marked the Crusades' culmination, with most choosing death over renouncing their faith. In the 13th century, Europe was a land of fierce religious fervour, where the power of the Church intertwined with the political might of kings and emperors. This era was marked by brutal acts of persecution and extremism, all in the name of preserving the faith. The Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 AD, convened by Pope Innocent III, issued decrees to reinforce Christian orthodoxy and marginalize Jews and heretics. Jews and Muslims were mandated to wear distinctive clothing, leading to increased discrimination, violence, and social ostracization. This policy laid the groundwork for centuries of anti-Semitic persecution. Pope Gregory IX established the Papal Inquisition in 1231 AD with the clear and ruthless purpose of identifying and prosecuting heretics. The methods employed were horrific, with accused heretics facing the rack, the strappado, and other forms of torture designed to extract confessions. Public executions were common, serving as grim spectacles of the Church's power. Anti-Semitic policies and violence against Jews intensified during the 12th century. The 1190 AD massacre of Jews in York saw a mob besiege the Jewish population in Clifford's Tower, with many choosing suicide over forced conversion. The Rhineland massacres of 1096 AD continued to resonate, leading to further anti-Jewish violence and expulsions. In 1182 AD, King Philip II of France expelled Jews, seizing their property and forcing them to leave. Similar expulsions in other parts of Europe disrupted Jewish communities and livelihoods. In 1290, King Edward I of England issued an edict expelling all Jews from his kingdom. Thousands were forced into exile, their properties confiscated, and many perished from starvation and hardship. Amidst these acts of persecution, the Crusades continued to cast a shadow over the century. The Fourth Crusade, initially aimed at reclaiming Jerusalem, took a devastating turn. In 1204, Crusaders sacked Constantinople, looting and destroying the city and massacring its inhabitants, many of whom were fellow Christians of the Eastern Orthodox Church. This betrayal deepened the schism between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, a division that echoes to this day. The Children's Crusade of 1212 was a tragic and misguided endeavour where thousands of children set out to peacefully convert Muslims in the Holy Land, believing they were on a divine mission. But their journey ended in disaster, with many sold into slavery or dying from starvation and disease. The Black Death, a devastating plague that swept through Europe, killed millions and led to widespread panic and fear. Jews were scapegoated and accused of poisoning wells and spreading the disease. This baseless accusation resulted in pogroms and massacres across Europe, with entire Jewish communities wiped out in horrific acts of violence. One of the most notorious massacres occurred in Strasbourg in 1349, where hundreds of Jews were burned alive after being blamed for the plague. These brutal acts were often sanctioned by local authorities, who shared or exploited the widespread anti-Semitic sentiments. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478 by Ferdinand and Isabella, aimed to maintain Catholic orthodoxy. Its primary targets were conversos, Jews suspected of secretly practicing Judaism, and Muslims who had converted to Christianity. The Inquisition's methods were brutal, with torture routinely used to extract confessions and public executions known as auto da fe designed to instill fear. Thousands were tortured, imprisoned, and executed during this period. In 1492, the Alhambra decree ordered the expulsion of all Jews from Spain, forcing them to convert to Christianity or leave the country. This led to the exile of tens of thousands of Jews and the confiscation of their properties. Accused witches, often women, faced brutal interrogations and executions, reinforcing the Church's power. The 16th century brought immense upheaval with the Protestant Reformation, which began in 1517 when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg. This act challenged Catholic practices and doctrines, sparking a religious revolution and leading to new Protestant denominations and religious conflicts. Protestants faced brutal persecution in Catholic-dominated regions, including the Spanish Netherlands, France, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572 saw thousands of French Huguenots slaughtered, highlighting the extremes of religious intolerance. King Charles IX, allegedly influenced by his mother, Catherine de' Medici, ordered the killings, which spread from Paris to the countryside, leaving a trail of blood and terror. Many fled to other countries where they could practice their faith freely. The 16th century also marked the height of European witch hunts, with tens of thousands executed. The Würzburg and Bamberg witch trials in Germany were among the most notorious, with thousands burned at the stake for alleged witchcraft. In the early 16th century, the city of Munster in Germany became the epicenter of a radical Anabaptist movement. Led by John of Leyden, the Anabaptists seized control of the city and declared it the New Jerusalem, anticipating the imminent return of Christ. John proclaimed, "We are the chosen people and the kingdom of God is at hand." The radical regime imposed harsh laws, including communal ownership and polygamy. The rebellion ended violently when the city was besieged by Catholic and Lutheran forces. The leaders were captured, tortured, and executed, their bodies displayed in cages as a warning. In the early 17th century, the astronomical model of heliocentrism, proposed by Copernicus, which suggested that the Earth revolves around the Sun, was met with strong opposition from the Catholic Church. One of the most prominent critics was Cardinal Robert Bellarmine. He famously stated, "To assert that the Earth revolves around the Sun is as erroneous as to claim that Jesus was not born of a virgin." Those who declared scientific doctrines outside the Church's canon were severely punished, with Galileo suffering house arrest and Giordano Bruno being mercilessly burnt alive in the name of Christ. Even in 2024, heliocentrism has not been fully accepted in certain Christian circles, with martial artist Bryce Mitchell proudly stating that he is a flat earther, a geocentrist, and believes that gravity is a hoax. In the 17th century, coffee was a relatively new and controversial beverage in Europe. Some Christian groups, particularly the Puritans, viewed it with suspicion. They warned that the beverage is the devil's tool, used to entice people into sinful behavior and idleness. These sentiments reveal the fear of new cultural influences and the tendency to view unfamiliar practices as morally corrupting. Despite this opposition, coffee eventually became widely accepted, illustrating the slow but inevitable shift in societal norms. Throughout history, numerous Christian scholars and leaders have predicted the imminent end of the world, driven by interpretations of biblical prophecies. In the 17th century, a radical Puritan group known as the Fifth Monarchy believed that the end times were imminent and that they were destined to establish a theocratic government. They interpreted contemporary political upheaval as a sign of the approaching millennium. Their leader, Thomas Venner, declared, "We expect the sudden appearance of our Lord and the establishment of his kingdom." Their insurrection in 1661 was quickly quashed, and Venner was executed. European powers expanded into the New World, bringing missionaries determined to convert indigenous populations. The Spanish and Portuguese efforts to convert the Aztecs, Incas, and other native peoples were often violent and coercive. Indigenous religious practices were suppressed, sacred sites destroyed, and those resisting conversion faced brutal punishment. Many Christian missionaries and colonizers justified the genocide of native populations using biblical rhetoric. They believed they were fulfilling a divine mandate. One common justification echoed the sentiment, "The Lord our God gave them into our hands so that we could destroy them utterly." This conviction, drawn from biblical conquest narratives, was used to legitimize the brutal subjugation and extermination of indigenous peoples in Africa and the New World, reflecting a dark chapter where religious zeal fueled unimaginable atrocities. The 30 Years' War, from 1618 to 1648, one of Europe's most destructive conflicts, began as a religious war between Catholic and Protestant states in the Holy Roman Empire. It escalated into a brutal, widespread conflict involving most of Europe's great powers, resulting in massive casualties and widespread suffering. Both sides committed horrific atrocities, massacring entire towns and subjecting civilians to brutal sieges and starvation. The war ended with the Peace of Westphalia, promoting greater religious tolerance and recognizing both Protestant and Catholic territories, but the scars of the war lasted for generations. Witch hunts continued to claim lives across Europe and the American colonies during this period. The infamous Salem witch trials of 1692 resulted in the execution of 20 people and the imprisonment of many more. Accusations of witchcraft were often driven by superstition, personal vendettas and fear, leading to the torture and death of countless innocent people. The 18th century marked significant transitions as the Enlightenment began challenging the established order and promoting reason, science, and individual rights. Thinkers like Voltaire, John Locke, and Montesquieu criticized religious abuses and advocated for religious tolerance, freedom of thought, and the separation of church and state. This intellectual shift began to undermine the Church's power, paving the way for more secular societies. Advancements in medicine often faced opposition from Christian scholars who believed that divine will governed health and illness. Throughout the 17th to 19th centuries, a common sentiment was, interfering with the natural course of illness is against the will of God. Smallpox vaccination emerged as a groundbreaking medical innovation. However, it faced opposition from some Christian leaders who believed it interfered with divine will. Reverend Edmund Massey, in his 1722 sermon, declared, "Diseases are sent by providence for the punishment of sin, and to avert them is to oppose the will of God." As the Enlightenment ideals spread, the witch hunts that had plagued Europe for centuries began to decline. Scientific explanations for natural phenomena and a growing skepticism of superstition contributed to the end of widespread witch trials. The last known execution for witchcraft in Europe took place in Switzerland in 1782. In Britain and Ireland, anti-Catholic laws known as the penal laws were enforced to maintain Protestant dominance. Catholics were barred from holding public office, owning land, and practicing their religion openly. The 19th century was marked by dramatic change and conflict, characterized by the expansion of European empires, the rise of nationalism, and significant religious and cultural clashes. Christian missionary activity spread globally, often hand-in-hand with colonial governments. In Africa and Asia, missionaries aimed to convert indigenous populations, frequently undermining traditional beliefs and practices, leading to cultural conflicts and resistance. The 19th century also saw significant anti-Semitic activity in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, where pogroms, violent attacks against Jewish communities, were prevalent in Russia and Poland. These attacks were fueled by economic hardship, social unrest, and long-standing prejudices, resulting in the destruction of entire communities and the deaths or displacement of thousands of Jews. One of the most infamous examples of 19th century anti-Semitism was the Dreyfus Affair in France. In 1894, Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish French army officer, was falsely accused of treason. His trial and conviction exposed deep-seated anti-Semitism within French society, sparking a major political scandal and significant public debate about justice and equality. The publication of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species in 1859 sparked significant controversy among Christian scholars. One of the earliest and most famous critics was Charles Hodge, a leading theologian of Princeton Theological Seminary. In 1874, Hodge wrote, "What is Darwinism? It is atheism. This does not mean that Mr. Darwin himself and all who adopt his views are atheists, but it means that his theory is atheistic, that the exclusion of design from nature is tantamount to atheism." As late as 1925, William Jennings Bryan, a staunch opponent of Darwin's theory, articulated his objections during the famous Scopes trial. He declared, "The Darwinian theory represents man reaching his present perfection by the operation of the law of hate, the merciless law by which the strong crowd out and kill off the weak." Bryan's condemnation of evolution reflected a broader conflict between scientific advancements and religious beliefs. Christianity played a significant role in 19th century China, particularly during the Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, led by Hongshu Quan, who claimed to be the younger brother of Jesus Christ. This rebellion aimed to overthrow the Qing dynasty and establish a new Christian kingdom, resulting in an estimated 20 to 30 million deaths, which was 5 to 10% of China's population, and widespread devastation. Hong's proclamation, "Heavenly Father has sent me to establish his kingdom on earth," inspired widespread violence and chaos. The rebellion was eventually crushed by Qing forces, but the devastation it caused left a lasting scar on Chinese history. In 1857, amidst tensions between Mormon settlers in Utah and the United States government, a group of Mormons and Paiute Indians attacked a wagon train of emigrants traveling from Arkansas to California. Believing that the emigrants posed a threat to their community and inspired by apocalyptic fears, the attackers killed around 120 men, women, and children in what became known as the Mountain Meadows Massacre. John D. Lee, a key figure in the massacre, later stated, "We were acting under orders, believing it was a duty to God." The massacre remains a dark chapter in Mormon history, highlighting the dangers of apocalyptic paranoia. As the 19th century progressed, the spread of secularism and the rise of nationalist movements began to challenge traditional religious authorities. Enlightenment ideals, emphasizing reason, science, and individual rights, led to increased calls for the separation of church and state and greater religious tolerance. The 20th century saw immense transformation, marked by two world wars, the rise and fall of totalitarian regimes, and significant advancements in human rights. Despite progress towards greater secularism and religious freedom, the century was also marred by extreme religious persecution, anti-Semitism, and religiously motivated violence. The rise of secularism and the separation of church and state became more pronounced in the 20th century. Many Western nations adopted policies promoting religious tolerance and legal protections for religious freedom. However, these advancements did not eliminate religious extremism or the persecution of minority religious groups. One of the most horrific manifestations of anti-Semitism in the 20th century was the Holocaust. From 1933 to 1945, the Nazi regime in Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, systematically sought to exterminate the Jewish population of Europe. 6 million Jews were murdered in concentration camps, ghettos, and mass shootings, highlighting the devastating consequences of unchecked hatred and intolerance. In 1978, Jim Jones, leader of the People's Temple, convinced his followers that the end of the world was imminent and that they needed to escape to the remote jungle of Jonestown, Guyana. Facing increasing scrutiny and fearing an apocalyptic showdown, Jones orchestrated a mass murder-suicide, urging his followers to drink cyanide-laced punch. In a tragic event that shocked the world, over 900 people died, including many children. Jones's last words were recorded. "We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide, protesting the conditions of an inhumane world." The Jonestown massacre remains a harrowing reminder of the deadly potential of apocalyptic cults. In 1993, the Branch Davidian sect led by David Koresh became the focus of a tragic and violent end-time delusion. Koresh, who claimed to be the final prophet, predicted an imminent apocalypse and stockpiled weapons in preparation. His followers believed that they were living in the end times and that Koresh would lead them through the apocalypse. This belief culminated in a 51-day standoff with the FBI at their compound in Waco, Texas. The siege ended disastrously, with a fire that killed 76 people, including Koresh. The Waco siege remains a stark example of how apocalyptic fervor can lead to catastrophic violence. Religious conflicts and extremism were not limited to Europe. In the United States, groups like the Ku Klux Klan used Christianity to justify their racist and anti-Semitic agendas. The Klan terrorized African Americans, Jews, Catholics, and other minorities through lynchings, bombings, and intimidation, demonstrating the dangers of religious extremism intertwined with racial and nationalistic ideologies. Globally, the 20th century witnessed numerous religious conflicts. In Northern Ireland, the Troubles, a violent conflict between Protestant Unionists and Catholic nationalists, resulted in over 3,500 deaths from the late 1960s until the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. The conflict was deeply rooted in religious and national identities, leading to decades of violence and suffering. The Zanzibar genocide of 1964 is another dark chapter influenced by Christian extremism. In the wake of the revolution, African revolutionaries, inspired by a distorted Christian ideology and led by John Gideon Okello, who was convinced he had been given orders by God to break the powerful position of the Arabs and to found a revolutionary state on Zanzibar, targeted Arab and South Asian communities, resulting in thousands of deaths and widespread atrocities. The Balkan Wars of the 1990s, following the breakup of Yugoslavia, saw severe ethnic and religious violence involving Orthodox Christian Serbs, Catholic Croats, and Bosnian Muslims. Ethnic cleansing, mass atrocities and genocide, such as the Srebrenica massacre, highlighted the destructive potential of religious and ethnic hatred. The 21st century has seen a troubling rise in right-wing hate groups motivated by religion. These groups and individuals have perpetrated numerous acts of violence, including mass shootings and terrorist attacks, often citing their Christian beliefs as justification. One of the most infamous examples is the 2011 Norway attacks carried out by Anders Behring Breivik, who killed 77 people, claiming to defend Christianity against Islam and multiculturalism. In the United States, the rise of right-wing Christian extremism has been marked by several mass shootings and acts of domestic terrorism. In 2015, Dylan Roof, a white supremacist, killed 9 African-American churchgoers during a Bible study in Charleston, South Carolina, citing his belief in white supremacy and Christianity. The 2018 Pittsburgh synagogue shooting by Robert Bowers, which resulted in 11 deaths, was driven by anti-Semitic beliefs and references to protecting Christian values. In New Zealand, the 2019 Christchurch mosque shootings by Brenton Tarrant resulted in 51 deaths. Tarrant's manifesto focused on anti-Muslim sentiments, referencing the defense of European Christian culture. The rise of right-wing hate groups has not been confined to the West. In the Central African Republic, anti-Balaka militias, primarily composed of Christians, have committed atrocities against Muslim communities, claiming to defend Christian communities. Similarly, in Uganda, the Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, led by Joseph Kony, has waged a decades-long campaign of terror. Kony, who claims to be guided by Christian beliefs and fighting for the Ten Commandments, has been responsible for the abduction, torture and murder of thousands of people. The LRA's actions are a stark example of how religious extremism can fuel widespread violence and human rights abuses. According to Francis Ongum, a former LRA officer who defected, Kony has found Bible justifications for killing witches, those who farm or eat pigs, and for killing other people because God did the same with Noah's flood and Sodom and Gomorrah. In Europe, right-wing Christian extremists have also carried out attacks. The 2016 murder of British Member of Parliament Jo Cox by Thomas Mayer was driven by nationalist and Christian extremist ideologies. Mayer saw his actions as a defence of Britain against multiculturalism and perceived threats to Christian values. The rise of right-wing hate groups and individuals motivated by Christian extremism poses a significant threat to peace and security. These groups exploit religious narratives to justify their actions, leading to devastating consequences for targeted communities. Addressing the rise of right-wing hate groups requires countering radical ideologies, fostering interfaith dialogue, and protecting the rights of all individuals to live free from fear and persecution. From ancient Rome to modern America, Christian extremism has left a trail of blood and terror. Understanding this dark history is crucial to preventing its resurgence. By acknowledging the brutal past, we can work towards a future where faith is a force for unity, not division. While faith is important to many, it must be held lightly enough to avoid committing atrocities in its name. This video aims to educate, not divide. Stay tuned for our next video on Islamic extremism, followed by other faiths and ideologies. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe for more content. Together we can build a world where faith is a force for good, not division.